I can't believe I'm coming up on my 5th year of living in Winston-Salem. In 2019, my 2 sons and I moved from the suburbs of Chicago, and man, have some things changed. While Winston-Salem has moved up in the best places to live in the country according to Livability and US News, not everything here is sunshine and rainbows, gummy bears and taffy. I've made these pros and cons videos every year since I've lived here, and I'm going to link all of those in a playlist in the description below. The first one starting in 2020 was more general about the area, location, and things like that. Also in the one from 2020, not only is it a little bit more general, I have a little bit more hair, but I'm about 30 pounds heavier, so be warned. But then these videos have gotten a little bit more specific through the years, and this year is no different. We're going to talk about the 2024 pros and cons of living in Winston-Salem. I sell real estate as my real job. My contact information is below. Reach out if you need help. The first pro about living in Winston-Salem is the tremendous variety of neighborhoods and suburbs throughout the area. Inside the city itself, you know, the city is so historic. There is just a huge variety of neighborhoods within the city itself. You have neighborhoods with dense urban feel. You have downtown condos, but you also have a lot of historic homes in the city too, if that's what you're into. There are giant, beautiful homes from the old tobacco days. There are neighborhoods with a more open suburban feel with bigger lots. And still within about 10 minutes of downtown, you have areas that feel more open and rural even, but still in the city of Winston-Salem. There's college neighborhoods here. There are neighborhoods where people tend to retire to. There are neighborhoods in the city itself where people tend to raise families, where young urban professionals. There's just a huge variety. And when you include the suburbs, that variety grows even more. You have more real or developed suburbs like Kernersville and Clemens, where there are a lot of shopping, a lot of restaurants. Families tend to like these areas. Then there are suburbs with a more small town kind of quaint feel like Louisville. And one of the best things about these suburban areas is even though you're in the suburbs, you're still only, 10 or 12 minutes from Trader Joe's, Whole Foods, Costco, things like that, or about 15 minutes to downtown. But then if you want to be about 15 or 20 minutes from downtown, you have more quiet, rural feeling small towns like Rural Hall and Poptown. And then there are areas that are kind of growing or retirement friendly, places like Advance or Bermuda Run. So almost whatever type of neighborhood you want to live in, Winston-Salem and the surrounding area has something to offer for everyone. In my eyes, that's just a huge pro because it can appeal to a wide variety of people. All right, the first con about living in Winston-Salem is the crime, and yes, we're just going to go there today. Crime in Winston-Salem is higher than the national average. And for obvious reasons, that's unfortunate, but there is some good news with that. The police department publishes reports on a regular basis where they have a 3-year comparison of overall and the different types of crime throughout the city. And the good news is overall crime is down almost 26% from last year and has continued to decline over the last few years. This is great news. You know, a lot of the country saw an unfortunate increase in homicide in 2023, and that's true in Winston-Salem as well. While overall crime throughout the city did decrease quite a bit in 2023, there was an uptick in the homicide rate in the city. There is a little bit of good news in this because in 2024 so far, when you compare it to the 2023 stats, all crime, including homicides, are much lower than they were last year in 2023. And Winston-Salem is a city, and like cities, there are parts of the city that have higher crime and lower crime. I'll give you a couple resources if you want to check that out. The first is Neighborhood Scout, where if you pull that up in the city, you'll see just a general overview. The lighter purple areas tend to be less crime, and the darker purple areas are higher crime. And what you're going to see on there is, unfortunately, that higher crime tends to be in lower income areas, like most cities. The next resource is crimemapping.com, where you can plug in an actual address, and you can see down to the street level in most cases where crimes are happening. You can set date ranges. You can see the different types of crime that's going on. So those are 2 resources I encourage you to take a look at to get more information on what's going on right now. All right, the next pro about living in Winston-Salem is the city itself still kind of flies under the radar. And what I mean by that is even though it gets some national recognition and it's moving up on some of these charts, there are still a lot of people that don't understand or appreciate living in Winston-Salem. Winston-Salem has kind of taken a backseat to Raleigh and Charlotte, when people talk about moving to North Carolina and things like that. And one of the things I like about that is city leaders are content with that. They've stated on multiple different occasions that they don't want to compete with Raleigh or Charlotte. Instead of competing with Raleigh and Charlotte, what they want to do is they do have some very specific and lofty goals though. They want to maximize overall quality of life, and they've stated goals to be the best mid-sized city in the Southeast by 2030 and one of the best places to raise a family in the Southeast by 2030 as well. I love the fact that Winston-Salem is kind of a hidden gem. It's growing and there are exciting things happening, but it's going at a very steady, controlled pace. It has so many of the amenities of a city that people like without the congestion and strains on infrastructure and schools that people don't like about growing areas. So it really hits a great balancing act there. And I, for one, am kind of happy that it is kind of still under the radar even after these last few years. All right, the next con about living in Winston-Salem is project delays. And I guess this has affected a lot of the country, but I want to talk about Winston-Salem in specific with these. Because, during the pandemic, there was supply chain issues, labor issues that continued on for years and are just now starting to clear up. But that did cause delays in some really nice projects that the city has planned, which I think is kind of hampering the city overall. Two main ones to talk about are the Beltway project. The far western edge of the Beltway construction has been pushed off now until 2030, when it was anticipated to be complete by 2028 or 2030 previously. If you don't know, the Beltway is going to be just like what it sounds, a big kind of Beltway highway system around the entire city. Like most modern cities, this is designed to make it easy to get from one side to the other, or Winston-Salem to Greensboro easier. It's going to give alternate routes as the Carolina Core develops and really ensure that traffic throughout the city does not get to be a huge problem. So I was kind of excited about the Beltway, but it has been delayed until 2030. The other is Innovation Corridor 2. The renderings on this project are just beautiful, and it should have been well under construction right now. It's going to be a mix of shopping, retail, residential, commercial real estate, but with a lot of green area and just some really cool design features. And like I said, it should have been well underway right now, but really now they're just getting going on the infrastructure portion of it. So that has been delayed a year or two. Those are two big projects, but there are numerous other ones that happened throughout the city over the last few years, especially, like I said, typical throughout the country during the pandemic times. Caladium Museum downtown is just now opening after a delay of about a year. But it really is starting to seem like a lot of that is behind us and things are getting to be much more on track now, although a little bit delayed. All right, next pro about living in Winston-Salem, and I'll give you a 2-for-1 here, is the community and the overall economy. I've lived in quite a few places and traveled a fair amount throughout the U.S. as well, and I can tell you this, the community in Winston-Salem is special. From locals that are just kind and helpful to friendly neighbors to a lot of different social groups, a lot of opportunities for activities almost no matter what you're into, the community in Winston-Salem is really special. And they support small business here like no community I've seen before. It's really been amazing to see. Quick story, there was a coffee shop that is a newer one in Winston-Salem that was struggling. They made a post on Facebook where they talked briefly about their struggles. It was tough after opening and things like that. We shared it on our Living in Winston-Salem Instagram, and a lot of other places shared it as well. That weekend, after those posts went out, their parking lot was packed. They said they had more sales in that weekend than they had in an entire 6 weeks previous to that. And when I went by there over the next 2 or 3 weeks, the parking lot was always full. Winston-Salem supports small business like no place I've ever seen. It is really cool to see. And then the local economy here is really strong. Unemployment really tends to be below the national average, and good news on wages in Winston-Salem as well. While other cities in North Carolina like Charlotte and Raleigh have seen declines in wages year over year, Winston-Salem has still seen an uptick in overall wages in 2023 and into 2024 as well. And with businesses expanding here, coming here, adding additional workforce here, I think that's just great news for the future of the city as well and its economy. All right, the next con about living in Winston-Salem, and I guess this is kind of for the entire state of North Carolina, but it is the due diligence process when you're buying real estate. If you didn't know, Winston-Salem is a caveat emptor or buyer beware state. What that means in their real estate contracts, they're one of the very, very few states like this. They don't have built-in protections for the buyer. What they have instead is a due diligence process, and the buyer pays for that as part of the negotiation when they're making an offer. And that includes a deposit, and that deposit is negotiable, but during the pandemic years, we saw these deposits go crazy. Really large sums of money that people were having to offer just to get a home under contract. And I'll be honest with you, as a real estate agent, it kind of stinks. I understand the intent of this policy. It was made to reflect the market. So in a very slow market, that due diligence process would favor buyers, and the opposite is true when the market favors sellers. The problem is that the market swung so far to favoring sellers the last couple years, and it still favors sellers right now, that buyers were having to make really huge deposits on due diligence that are the vast majority of the time non-refundable. Good news on that is after helping hundreds of people move here, I've got a great system in place to really minimize risk, and even more so with the market coming into a little bit more stability, we don't see those giant deposits that we did once before. It's much much more in line. It is still a risk for the buyer that I'm not a huge proponent of, but like I said, I understand the intent and we've got some systems to really minimize that. But overall, not a fan of the due diligence process when you're buying real estate. All right, the next pro about living in Winston-Salem is the surrounding area and the rest of the triad. And I've talked about the location before. That's not what I mean now. You know, it's close to the mountains and the beach and all that stuff like that. I'm talking about the surrounding area and the triad. Winston-Salem itself is a small or a medium-sized city, right, with about 260,000 people. But when you add in the surrounding cities, Greensboro, High Point, and those surrounding areas, we have a little bit over 1 million people. And granted, still not huge, but these are distinct cities that have very distinct feels to them. They offer different amenities. They offer some of the same things, but also provide very distinct experiences where I think the cities are pretty different. So if you're looking for a new place to eat or shop or go try a glass of wine or a cocktail, if you want different parks or playgrounds to take the kids or museums, different places to go out, bike, hike, and all those other things, just in about 30 minutes, you can be in a totally different feeling space. These other similar sized cities being so close to Winston-Salem really enhances the overall quality and variety of things to do all within about 30 minutes. Now, if you ask people from here, they tend to, if you're from Winston-Salem, they stay in Winston-Salem, hardly go to Greensboro. I've seen the opposite of people that aren't from here, where they come here. They're much more likely to go out and explore. And I think that is a miss for people that are from here that just tend to stay in Winston-Salem or Greensboro, whatever the case may be. Getting out and exploring these different cities really adds some tremendous variety. I think you're going to love it. All right, the next con about living in Winston-Salem is the lack of walkability. I talk to people often where they're looking for walkable neighborhoods, and really we have some of that in Winston-Salem, but if walkability is really high on your list of priorities, just know it's really going to limit the neighborhoods that you can choose from. They're great neighborhoods, mind you, but it is going to limit the number of areas where you can live if walkability is really high on your list of priorities. Now, the city does have a plan to make the area more walkable through connecting greenways, more sidewalks, and things like that. But see the previous con about project delays, that is not progressing as quick as they originally planned. But like I said, they have things in progress just a little bit slower than I would like. But if walkability is really high on your list of priorities, it's really going to limit your neighborhood choices. If you're thinking about moving to Winston-Salem or anywhere in the surrounding area, I'd love to be a resource for you. You can reach out to me directly at jeff@govalentino.com. Thanks.